May it please the court, the defense, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. At 77 years old, Tina Lohman had raised 4 children. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. She ran a successful business with her husband, Tim. But to Tina, what was most important was her family. And on November 9th, 2021, she was looking forward to celebrating the upcoming Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays with her family. She was looking forward to spending those holidays with her husband, her children, her 14 grandchildren, and her 17 great-grandchildren. She had bought the Christmas presents, they were wrapped, they were ready to be placed under the Christmas tree. But Tina Lohman, she wouldn't get to see the joy and the looks of anticipation on the faces of those grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She wouldn't get to hear them say, "Merry Christmas, Grandma," when they showed up at her house to open those presents. She wouldn't get to experience the joy of opening the presents that her husband and children had bought her. Because on November 9th, 2021, she was kidnapped by the defendant, she was robbed by the defendant, and she was brutally and violently sexually by the defendant. The defendant left Tina bruised and battered. He left her bleeding on the floor, stand, emotionally and physically scarred until she would die 33 days later on December 12th, 2021. On November 9th, 2021, Tina was driving home when it was starting to get dark. She started to have car trouble. She must have been so scared, like any woman would
Your Honor,
be.
I'd object.
Grounds?
The death has no relevance in this case.
You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. She must have been so scared, as any woman would be, driving home at night with car trouble, alone on a dark bottom road, and no one to help her. But then a car started. How do you think she felt? Was she relieved? Did she think she was going to get help? Was she scared? Was something bad about to happen? But she was 77 years old, and this is Quincy. Nothing bad happens in Quincy, right? In Quincy, when you have trouble, people stop, they pull over, and they help you. But instead of a random act of kindness, the defendant and his accomplice showed up. They showed up to commit an act of violence, an act of terror, of rape. Every woman's worst nightmare on a dark bottom road. The defendant forced his way into Tina's car. Tina thought it was about taking money and jewelry from her. She thought the defendant was going to kill her, so she told her she had more stuff back at her house. The defendant's accomplice followed them and hurt another car. But the defendant was not just satisfied with money or jewelry. The defendant wanted more from this 77-year-old great-grandmother. As the defendant drove Tina's car back toward the house as they were being followed by the accomplice, the defendant reached over, grabbing Tina and forced his penis into her mouth. When they arrived at Tina's house, Tina was able to get away. She was able to run inside, lock the door, while the defendant and the woman with him, his accomplice, were in the garage. But the defendant wasn't done. He wasn't going to let Tina get away. He kicked in the door to her house, breaking down the door, leaving a shoe print, and the nightmare for Tina continued. The defendant stole money and jewelry from inside Tina's house. He pushed her down the stairs, and he tried to get into her basement safe. Then, the defendant bent Tina over a chair in her living room. He shoved his penis into her vagina. He shoved his penis into her mouth. He told her to act like she liked it. And then, when the defendant was finished using Tina's dick, his twisted purposes, he sprayed her mouth and body with carpet cleaner. While the defendant was doing all of these things, robbing her, assaulting her, his accomplice, the woman that was with him, was holding a knife and threatening Tina's life. After the defendant finished robbing Tina of her dignity, he fled. He fled with Tina's purse. He fled with her jewelry. He took her money. He fled with Tina's car. He even took Tina's rosary. Then he went across the river to Hannibal and he played video poker. When Tim Schmitt arrived home, he found Tina on the floor, crying and bleeding, crying that she'd been raped and her body. Next to Tina was the knife that her life had been threatened with. Tim, her husband, gave Tina a knife because Tina was so terrified the defendant and his accomplice were going to come back. Then he called 911. Tim asked Tina to tell him what it was, and she relived that nightmare again as she told him how she had been violated, how she had been robbed, how she had been left bloody and bruised on that floor. For the weeks after her assault, Tina was in pain, both emotional pain and physical pain. She never had the opportunity to recover because on December 12th, 2021, Tina's heart broke. Tina won't be able to take that witness stand. She won't be able to tell you what the defendant and the accomplice did to her. Instead, her husband will tell you what Tina told him that night when he found her crying and bleeding on their living room floor. Tell you about what happened on November 9th, 2021, but you will get to see the photographs that were taken at Blessing Hospital by the nurse, Jacqueline Oglesby. The photographs of Tina's mouth, where the defendant had sprayed her with carpet cleaner. The photographs of Tina's vagina, where the defendant had shoved his penis inside of her. The photographs of Tina's body, where showing that she had been left bruised and beaten. Tina won't be able to come here and tell you about the pain. She won't be able to tell you about the humiliation she suffered, but you will get Dr. Ada Kagumba, Tina's doctor, and she'll tell you about the injuries she observed on Tina the week after the defendant had assaulted her. Tina won't be able to come here. She won't be able to look the defendant in the eye and say, "You did this to me." But on that cold, dark November night, one of the reasons Tina was so terrified is she had no idea who the person was that attacked her. She didn't know his name, she didn't know where he had, and she didn't know where he went. But she did know. She knew he had a red beard, and she knew he had her purse, her jewelry. The day after November 9, 2021, on November 10th, 2021, the day after she had been brutally and violently robbed and sexually assaulted, the U.S. Marshals found the defendant in Springfield, Missouri. When they found the defendant in Springfield, Illinois. When they found the defendant in Springfield, the defendant had Tina's purse over his shoulder. Inside that purse were Tina's jewelry, Tina's voter ID card. On the defendant's wrist, Tina's watch. And inside the defendant's pocket was Tina's rosary. On the defendant's feet were a pair of shoes that exactly matched the shoe print left at the scene at Tina's house. And just down the street from where the defendant was found was Tina's car covered in the defendant's fingerprints. And despite efforts to destroy any DNA by spraying carpet cleaner on Tina, there was male DNA found by the Illinois State Police. Male DNA was found on the Depends, the adult diaper that Tina had been wearing that night of November 9th, 2021. DNA that was on Tina's Depends was determined to be 310 times more likely to be the defendant's DNA. The can of carpet cleaner that the defendant had used to spray Tina's mouth and body that was found at the house, that was tested for fingerprints. And the defendant's fingerprint was found on that can of carpet cleaner. What the defendant did, I on November 9th, 2021 was horrific. It was violent. It was a nightmare. It was something no woman, no 77-year-old grandmother should ever have to experience. What the defendant did to Tina Lohman on November 9th, 2021, it was sick. It was perverted. What he did to Tina Lohman is called home invasion. It's called aggravated kidnapping, aggravated vehicular hijacking. It's called residential, and it's called aggravated criminal assault. And at the end of this case, called to hold the defendant for what he did to Tina Lohman on November 9th, 2021. Thank you, Your Honor.